Even if you don't use React, you've probably heard of NextJS and maybe even heard of Remix. Those are the two predominant frameworks for building with React. But what if I told you there's a third, that it's really popular, and you probably haven't heard of it? You might say I'm crazy, but have you? Have you heard of ICE before? This is a very fascinating project. Almost 20K stars on GitHub, a ton of really cool patterns, some unique ways of building. It really is a unique React framework that just so happens to be built by Alibaba in China. I'm excited to dive deep into this with y'all because there's some really cool stuff going on. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is a component, but it's not just any component. It's AG Charts by the same people who made AG Grid, which is the solution for data grids. Now they're solving charts, and I think they did a phenomenal job. They call this the best JavaScript charts in the world, and having played with it a bit, it's hard to disagree. It supports most modern frameworks and vanilla JS if you want to do it yourself. And it has every type of chart, from bar charts to line charts to more complex things like chord graphs where you're showing relationships between things, pyramids in case you're into conspiracies or Vercel, radial grids, which are not easy to implement. As someone who spent too much time doing charts for admittedly kind of dumb reasons, seeing a library that handles everything like this is kind of unbelievable. By the way, all the source code is available and all the free parts are fully MIT licensed. So pretty much everything you're seeing here is truly freely available and open source. So for most people, this is going to be totally free. And for everyone else, the money spent will be absolutely worth it. I can say that with confidence because AG Grid knows what they're doing. As I love to point out, over 90% of Fortune 500 companies use AG Grid, and AG Chart's quickly going to get there too. Thank you to AG Charts for sponsoring today's video. Check them out today at soydev.link/charts. Credit where it's due. I found this because of Salty posting it on Twitter. There are some really cool things in there. The point that I realized I had to cover it was when they showed the syntax where they have their equivalent of views inline like directives for controlling things. Very interesting to see this in a React framework where you can say it should show this if is admin, otherwise this element shouldn't render. I now really want to understand how deep this goes. And the only way to do that is reading through the docs. Want to see, they do not have an English translation for the site, but I can make one. This is how every other dev that speaks any language other than English feels reading docs. ICE 3 is an application development framework that is based on React. An out-of-the-box R&D framework with built-in best practices such as project configuration, state management, data requests, permission management, allowing devs to focus more on business logic. Supports Web App 5, TypeScript, CSS modules, post-CSS, application mode for SPA, server-side rendering, SSR, and static builds. Cool that it offers all of those. This really feels like Next in a lot of ways, but with a more in-your-face, like direct focus on mobile, because it's a much larger concern in these markets, especially mobile web. ICE is a front-end solution based on React. It provides basic capabilities like application construction, routing, debugging, and micro front-end stuff and integration capabilities based on the application development framework. Also combines visual operations, material reuse, and other solutions to lower the R&D threshold. Interesting. I've seen R&D a few times. I don't know if that's a bad translation. My assumption is that this is meant to make it easier to spin something up from scratch quickly. Why use ICE over Webpack directly? Webpack only provides the basic building capabilities. So this is very like reason of existing similar to Next.js, where initially like setting up React with Webpack properly was annoying and Create React App didn't go far enough. Next was meant to go further and add server-side rendering for static generation. Now it is what it is today. ICE seems like it was going down a similar trajectory, but it looks like they drew a line before going too far. They do say that it's necessary to have some front-end experience. Good. I have to see the directory structure. This is always something I'm curious about. Pages, about, layout. What does this do? Can I translate this here? Global layout components. Okay, so they have a global layout that you can put like this, similar to layouts in App Router, but the naming about TSX and home TSX suggests that they don't have a single page route. They do it this way instead. Pages, conventional routing, automatically generates routes based on the file. They have a whole section on routing. I am curious. Index, about, repo preview. Interesting. I am curious what the mini program is, if that's like their like MPA path or something. Likely a bad translation. I'm amazed how much I can get out of this with just a Google Translate on the page though. This is super cool. And outlets, interesting. They're taking parts from React Router and Remix as well as parts from Next.js here. Apparently their service mocking stuff is really cool. Y'all know how I feel about testing and mocking, but Good they haven't. This is also the only major front-end framework right now for React that takes micro front-end seriously. Next.js has historically tried to not care and avoid that stuff, and Remix doesn't either. Very interesting. Very interesting, the things that they have considered here. JSX Plus. Very scary, but I'm curious what they're doing with this. Although JSX has flexible syntax, a large number of curly braces plus JS syntax leads to decreasing in context switching and code readability. JSX Plus introductions solve the problem well. JSX is essentially a JS expression. The real DOM structure can only be calculated at runtime. JSX Plus introduces some static template features to meet compilation optimization. Interesting. And these JSX Plus extensions are things like the XIF, XElse. Interesting. I don't love this because it's not nested. Like the direct relationship between the if and the else if is weird because I can't just move this element and have it work. I'm not as against like the X for or the XIF, but once it's like XIF then XElse, that's when I get iffier about it. Ooh, XMemo. That's actually really cool. You're saying that this can be cached and never rerun. Slot scopes. Interesting. So the slot lets you say that this will get re-rendered out there separately. It's cool seeing a React framework being developed in a completely separate environment like this, where like they can see what we're doing and copy it and then not copy things they don't like and even do their own stuff too. I saw something similar in Vue. Was it Vue Vine? Where somebody did the opposite, where they took some Reactisms and brought them to Vue. Vine lets you write syntax that looks a lot more similar to React, where you can have multiple functions that are components in the same file and have them call each other. You return using the Vine keyword with a template string. And in here, you can do the traditional Vue syntax where you can have like an @click or a test ID or all the other props and directives you normally would have access to in Vue. But you can write your functions in a component within a function body like this, which I thought was really cool. This also, if I recall, is a project that largely started in China. And it's cool seeing these alternative approaches almost like unburdened by the current ecosystem and how strict that we are about things over here. It's so cool. Micro front ends, you know what? I think I might know who's sponsoring this video. I have a pending video with Zephyr Cloud, who is a company that focuses on making micro front ends viable for people. They're great. You almost think of like Vercel, but for micro front ends. So if you're trying to do something with that type of architecture where you have hundreds upon hundreds of engineers with different opinions trying to ship at the same time, super cool. Yeah, I haven't seen a framework that actually took this seriously from the start. They have like framework config built in, a starting point for it. You can set a library name for your micro package or your micro front end packages stuff and then mount it through their primitives. That is really cool. I might have to bug my friends over at Zephyr to ask them what they think about this because they will likely know a lot more than me. I heard things about the mocking, so let's take a look at this quick too. So we mock and add JS or TS files. Mock user, get. Oh, interesting. So you actually put it out with like the mode and the path to mock things. That's really convenient, actually. That is actually really good. That's one of the most minimal solutions I've seen to mocking network dependencies. Actually, genuinely very clever. They're winning me over. Shall we try it? Package.json, a great place to start. ICE runtime, React and React DOM are the only deps. And there's dev deps. TypeScript, good sign. Types for all these things. At ICE/app, I'm assuming that's how they bundle and do whatnot there. Very light on the deps. Am I going to be more scared after reading the PNPM lock? Yep. What does ICE runtime rely on? Just React. Interesting. I know this JSX runtime, ICE shared, and React router. So they are using React router under the hood. That's probably where the outlet stuff comes from. That makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. Did these guys beat Remix to static rendering? Because that'd be really funny if they did. What's document TSX? This is the document. Why does it not know that? It should know what ICE is from all the things installed, but maybe because it's not the named module, it's upset. I'll ignore that part for now. It's a small detail. I did not know there's an ESLint rule to let you know that your identifiers are too short. I might turn that on. I hate single letter variables so much. Sorry, Mark. He'll literally quit if I turn that on. Yeah, start is what we would want then. Cool. Ice. Let's try editing some stuff here. Hello, nerds. Please sub. Hot reloading's working. Doesn't break the state. All good signs so far. I don't know why ESLint's now being mad about things like that in single quotes. I shouldn't be as annoyed by these things as I am, but the fact that your own ESLint rules aren't being followed by your own template always pisses me off, because then I feel like I have to do, like, I'm assuming they have an ESLint fix and a stylint fix. So if I like pnpm run ESLint fix or run stylint fix, if this changed anything in the code, which it did, that to me is a concern, because that means they're not even following these rules as they're prescribing them to me. It's a small thing, but it's a thing nonetheless. Interesting. Let's make a new route. Test route.tsx. I'm going to not include any of these things. Let's just div sup nerds. This is test route. Oh, I'm not running the dev server. I'm stupid. Cool. Yeah, turns out running the dev server helps when you're doing things that rely on the dev server. All the parts are here. This is like a legit framework. I mean, I would hope so. It has 20K stars. But like, this is cool. I'm giving it a star for sure. I want to see what their state recommendations are, because they mentioned that. State. Oh, Redux. Okay, at least they have Immer. Immer makes Redux significantly less painful. I think it's basically enforced if you're using something like Redux Toolkit, which they aren't. iStore, simple, friendly state management solution for React apps. Has following core features. Simple, familiar API, integrated async processing, very interesting. Class components still, so you can use it with old projects, and TypeScript support. Interesting. This looks very similar to the XState store thing they recently put out. That's like the minimal alternative to Zustand. Very similar. Interesting. Oh shit, Diego got a shout out. Diego's a legend. And his work on constate, which was a better set of wrappers around context stuff for state, if I recall, was an inspiration for them. Really dope they shouted that out. These guys get it. I wouldn't be surprised if a handful of the people working on ICE watch my videos and are going to get really hyped when this happens. And respect to them. They're living in their own world and building genuinely really cool stuff in it. They have a whole doc page on element visibility. Use visibility change component to monitor when a specified element is currently visible or not. ICE appear. Interesting. I want to npm org at ICE. ICE app, ICE appear, ICE bundles, ICE cache canvas, porting canvas. Interesting. ICE CLI, shared create app stuff, CSS module stuff, a ton of it. ICE form, ICE hook store, their own JSX runtime. There is so much stuff here. This is like a whole world I've just never gotten to dig into. Even like their own stuff building around Docusaurus. It's like, I feel like I'm peering into a whole different world that is like speaking my language, but isn't at the same time. This is so cool. Yeah, these guys are absolutely shipping 113 packages, and I had heard of none of them before. Somebody called it they'd never seen anyone use unstable activity from React before. I also haven't. Yeah, they're heavily using all the off-screen stuff. This is the rename of unstable off-screen to unstable activity. Half the results for unstable activity are in Chinese because it's only like major recommendation for use is in ICE. That's actually really cool. Good for them. This is their React query clone. It actually looks quite different and much more focused on URLs. So they have their own request function, await request, URL, status, await request, common usage, request get user, request post. You can have a config for them too by passing it like that. That's actually really cool. Use request based on A hooks, use request. There's so many shout outs to the other things that they're relying on and inspired by too. That's a problem I've seen in a lot of open source stuff where they don't do it. This is just really good open source. Like they're doing everything right. They're shouting everything out. They are documenting the hell out of the stuff they're doing. Alibaba's killing it. Credit where it's due. This is way better than I would have expected. Like I've seen like a dozen React frameworks that aren't Next or Remix. I would put this at a similar level of flushed out. This is really good. Having all of these options with useRequest, it's React Query, but just to use like their request handling that they already had built. Does it not request by default? You have to tell it to? That is interesting. That is a very different workflow than I would expect. Actual business is more likely to be triggered manually. Interesting. So their use of this is primarily for like users doing things. So they don't want to default fetch it. Very interesting. Very, very different from the default something like React Query, for example, which is much more aggressively assuming you're using it to fetch data. I want to try the SSG stuff. You have to use data. Does it do static building by default? You don't have to config that? PM run build. Yeah, look at that. We have an index HTML. Hello nerds, please sub has the default stuff there. And then the test route, which has our minimal. I'll save it so it's formatted better. Has our minimal little sup nerds. Look at that. Damn. That puts it ahead of Remix. This is actually really cool. First, I want to see, like, does this opt out if you get data? No, it doesn't. So in order to opt out of SSG, you have to specify you want SSR true in your config. When SSR is enabled, the method exported in the routing component data loader will be executed on the server first. The SSR rendering is successful. It won't be called again on the client-side data loader, but the SSR result will be reused. It's only called on the client side when the page is redirected through routing on the browser side or the page is downgraded data loader. Okay, so you have to do a manual revalidation on the client side in order to get updated data. Makes sense. I guess the thing that isn't clear is, can you do SSR and SSG? Can I have some routes SSR and some routes not? Oh, here you go. You can use the ignore parameter to filter specific files for SSR or SSG products. Cool. Good shit. This is so flushed out. This is so far along. It's almost like they've been working on this for years. Actually, though, this is dope. Code splitting built in. Ability to manually enable or disable syntax feature. The TypeScript checker is part of your build. Disabled by default because it shouldn't be part of your build. You should run it separately. Thank you. Just good decisions all around. Also, to go back to the data loading thing with their data hook for the request thing, by making the default be you have to run that function, they've basically brute forced you to use a better data loading pattern, or at the very least make you feel bad for calling request inline like that. They show the conventional, God, I'm sure all of you have written this code. Please, if your way of getting data in React looks like this, watch my React query videos, please. But they have to use data and the data loader. Yeah, they're really trying to push you in that direction. Makes a ton of sense. You can even defer it with a defer helper. This is really good. Yeah, I have no notes. I'm excited to see how they support server components, because that's like the only thing I haven't seen yet. Doesn't come up in search because it's still a new thing. Yeah. Await. Did they have an await block? Yeah. This is another remixy thing where you could have an await block that you pass a promise that comes from the server. So here we have use info is await and item info is await. And we have these two promises coming from the data loader. And these are promises. And since they're using the data loading stuff built into React Router and Remix here, they might have rolled their own. I'm almost positive that's what they're using under the hood because they are using React Router under the hood. Now, these promises get serialized to the client and you can await them with their await helper component. And then it's a higher order component. So it just calls the child with whatever the response from this promise is. So you don't have to block on the server to get the user back a response. This is a really powerful pattern. Yeah, this is one of the most flushed out ways to use React Router that I've ever seen. Historically, I know Vue has had a much stronger hold in Chinese markets because their documentation and resources and everything have been much, much further along in terms of their internationalization. One of the things I'm most impressed with here is that the framework understands that most non-English speakers are going to struggle a lot with these things in React, because even the ones who do speak English and read the docs struggle with a lot of these things. So they have found a balance of documentation to lead you down the right path, as well as good defaults and patterns to make you less likely to fall down the wrong path to set people up for success in React. That's awesome. This is really good stuff. And I honestly think we can learn a lot in the Western framework world about what went well here. I would love to chat with some people who use ICE full time. If that's you, let me know in the comments or use the email that's on my YouTube channel, because this is genuinely really cool and I want to keep exploring. I don't want my bias of being a native English speaker in the West to prevent me from seeing these awesome innovations. So feel free to hit me up when you find things like this, and please contact me if you're working in this framework every day. I genuinely want to know more. I got nothing else for now, so until next time, peace nerds.